Hello and welcome to Calm the Pharm podcast, where pharmacy business meets legal wisdom, minus the headache. In each episode, we share practical legal tips and real-life examples to help you run your pharmacy with confidence. I'm your host, Sarah Stoddart. Thanks very much for joining us. Today is our fifth and final episode in the partnerships journey or series that we've been on for the last few weeks. And today we're talking about one of the most important considerations and the one that presents the most issues in practice, and that is life events. A few years ago, I looked at some data around pharmacy transactions and actually discovered at that time, and this is pre-COVID, that 18% of transactions have arisen because of an unexpected life event. Now, I suspect that statistic is actually higher now due to the state of the world and the tragedies that we hear of over time. But what is key here isn't the number. It is that the people involved in those transactions didn't think it would happen to them. But it did, and it does. And this is why you really need to take the steps to invest in your partnership now and avoid a headache later. If you fail to consider and plan for life events in your partnership, resentment will fill the gap that a partnership agreement should have occupied. Let's look closer at the life events that can and do occur, but are not always dealt with adequately in partnership agreements or indeed dealt with at all. The first one is leave entitlements. So, as you would be aware from our prior discussions in this partnership series, a partner in a partnership is not automatically an employee. Whilst they may be employed by the partnership at some point in time, that is not guaranteed. If a partner is not employed by the partnership and therefore not an employee, they work as a partner in the business and don't have any legal right to employee entitlements such as annual leave, personal leave, or parental leave. This means when they want to take a holiday, become unwell, or choose to start a family, it's not as easy as submitting a leave application or relying on your rights under the Fair Work Act. It's actually an awkward discussion and potentially a disagreement with your fellow partners. Further, in the absence of specific provisions around this, a partner being absent from a partnership for an extended period of time, whilst in their mind totally innocent, may actually trigger a termination resulting in a forced exit, which is unlikely to have been that partner's intention. The second life event is other interests. Oftentimes, partners want to have an interest in more than one pharmacy, and sometimes those other interests involve other people. Issues can arise when one partner is insistent on another dedicating their time and interest to one business, and the other partner, the one that's being forced to dedicate time and interest to one business, actually wants to spread their interest and time across multiple businesses. This can not only lead to a dispute, but in some instances may also trigger a restraint clause in the partnership agreement that has been dropped in without due consideration to each partner's wishes. That then may trigger a breach of the agreement. So you need to think about what's your plan for your career. Do you want to focus on one store, or is it the case that you might have multiple? And then how does that fit in with your partner's views on dedicating time and also involvement in your other interests? The third life event is injury or illness. None of us want to or intend to become injured, ill, or indeed pass away, but it happens. And when entering into a partnership, and certainly when preparing your partnership agreement, you need to consider what will happen if a partner becomes ill, injured, or passes away. Dealing with injury and illness, how much time will they be able to take off? What if they're physically impaired but not mentally impaired? What constitutes a permanent disability? So you may see that written in some agreements that if a partner becomes permanently disabled, certain things need to happen. But what does that actually mean? And who is going to determine that? These are all big and uncomfortable questions which need to be asked and answered, and ideally not when the issue has arisen. In terms of death of a partner, there are requirements at law to dispose of that partner's interests within 12 months. However, that's pretty clear cut. The issue is where the partnership agreement interacts with that person's will and whether or not there are other family members who are pharmacists and who could potentially own the deceased partner's interests. So there needs to be some pretty frank and open discussions around that. And like I say, it is uncomfortable, but it's also really important. The next one, divorce. With 1 in 3 marriages ending in divorce in Australia, it is almost inevitable, particularly if you're in partnership with 3 or more people, that you will be impacted by a marriage breakdown at some point. And when the partnership is impacted, it is messy. That's particularly so given a pharmacy business is often the most valuable asset of a relationship and forms part of the property pool to be split between the former spouses. If the partnership is not appropriately planned and laid out for what will happen if a partner's marriage breaks down, there's a risk that the impact on the business will be significant and potentially result in an unplanned sale. That is particularly so if the partner who's going through the breakdown doesn't have sufficient financial resources to pay out their former spouse in another way. So it may be that their interest or indeed the whole of the business has to be sold. Now, that can be court ordered, of course, so the partnership may not have a choice around that, but there's certainly steps that can be taken before it gets to that point so that the partnership and other partners are not caught up in that mess. And the 5th and final life event to discuss today is discipline or deregistration. So what are you going to do if a partner is the subject of disciplinary proceedings or is deregistered and needs to dispose of their interest quickly? What if they can own a pharmacy but can no longer manage it? Or what if they can manage it but can no longer own it? You need to think about these scenarios and how you're going to deal with them, particularly in circumstances where there are time constraints. And if a partner who is deregistered or under disciplinary proceedings needs to sell, how quickly can that happen and what are the terms of the sale? So what is the purchase price going to be, for example, and how is that going to work? Who are they actually going to sell to? So you need to think about all of those questions, and they are hard and quite confronting questions, and then plan for them before they impact on your business. So in terms of actioning those questions, going back to the first one being leave entitlements, if it is the intention for partners to receive leave entitlements despite not being employees, you need to actually include that in your partnership agreement so that everyone knows how much time they can have off and what will happen if they are indeed sick, ill, or injured at any point in time. In terms of other interests, you need to consider whether you're going to allow the partners in your partnership to have other interests, and if so, is that a bit of a free-for-all, or is it the case that they need to consider you in pursuing those other interests? Transparency and communication around that is absolutely key. Third one, injury and illness. Define permanent disablement so that it is clear when a partner is considered permanently disabled and also clear what that actually means for the partnership. You may also want to consider cross-insurance for all partners. So that's particularly so given how significantly a life event of a partner can impact on the entire partnership. Now, that is worth discussing with your financier or your insurance broker. And finally, termination clauses that actually allow the partnership to part ways with a partner impacted by divorce or deregistration quickly and logically and before it gets too messy. So basically, you're cutting off the partner that's got the issue early in the piece rather than dragging the partnership through the whole process. That, of course, is one option, but that needs to be discussed at a partnership level. Nobody knows what's around the corner, but when a number of lives come together in one partnership, it is almost guaranteed that the partnership will be impacted by a life event. Planning properly will avoid significant heartache for all involved. That's today's episode and the conclusion of our partnership journey. I do hope you found it beneficial. Please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next week.